Welcome to this afternoon's book review. I'm Mark Bond-Webster, today talking with our special guest Peter Barrow, who will be reviewing a book by Willi Peter Reese, A Stranger to Myself, The Inhumanity of War, Russia, 1941 to 1944. Welcome, Peter, and I apologise for what I'm sure was a savage butchery of the poor man's name.
Yes, well, I will continue where you have begun, and if I remember my German lessons from very long ago, it would be, I guess, something like Willi Peter Reese, although the name Reese is actually the English name Reese. So how he pronounced it, I don't really know.
Okay.
Anyway, we'll call him Willi.
There you go, that
short.
simplifies it. So, an account of the Russian front.
Well, yes, he was 20 when he was called up in early 1941, and he actually survived rather a long time. He was killed in the middle of 1944. And this book is a manuscript that he typed during his last period of home leave early in 1944. And he typed it up from letters that he'd sent home and from a journal which he kept, which was very illegal in the army. It's probably in any army, because in case you're captured, you don't want to give things away by what you've written down. However, he kept a journal very diligently.
Was he an officer, or was he an enlisted man? Or?
He was what used to be called a buck private in the American Army. He was a very, very peaceful chap. He was, as the chap who writes the introduction points out, Willi was he was like an embodiment to the point of parody of what was called in the 19th century Germany a land of thinkers and poets, Dichter und Denker. He was, I think he must have been an only child. He was very, very self-absorbed, really, but in a nice way. He liked his own company. He read a great deal. He liked his Baudelaire. He liked musing by the seaside. He liked collecting moss.
So he was a classic late romantic, really.
Yes, really, and he might have done rather well as a new ager in our time, hugging trees and so on.
Okay,
but he let's not exaggerate. He liked his wine and he liked his girls, and he had to work as a bank clerk to satisfy Dad. So he was a regular guy, as well as being rather moony and liking his own company.
Right,
and he was very to begin with, early in the war, very much the self-absorbed adolescent. He hardly even noticed the invasion of Poland.
Okay.
And the whole French campaign passed him by, and he wasn't actually called up until early 41, which was after those. And
so not a committed Nazi, presumably?
Not at all. The word, if I remember correctly, the word Nazi doesn't even occur once in the whole thing. And I don't think he would have avoided this for political reasons, because the manuscript was certainly not meant for publication. It was entirely for the desk drawer. Well, he would have known. He couldn't conceivably have published such a thing. But the word Nazi never appears. And when he's trying to make sense of it all, he never mentions politics, ever. It's all personal feelings and strainings after big explanations. He mentioned more than once the book Decline of the West by Oswald Spengler. So he was a deep thinker, would-be deep thinker. Now this tends to end rather badly because when he's being like this, he tends to be very purple. He as I said, he strains after the grand verbal gesture and a lot of stuff about God
and the big thought.
Big thought. However, once he's actually out there. Once he's gone through the training and been shipped out into the middle of Russia itself, the purple tends to stop, and he becomes very, very naturalistic and very vivid when he just writes about what he sees and what he experiences in himself. Not so much the deep thoughts, but just the sufferings and the physical feelings.
Because he wound up, the Russian front was one of the grimmest sort of crucibles of the whole Second World War, grimmest theatres of the whole Second World War. So,
it certainly was, and there are certain descriptions which are both very vivid and very gruesome. He doesn't pull punches when he describes corpses and hanged partisans seen up close. He doesn't, or his own his own purulent legs, as he called them, because he was at the end of the first winter in Russia, which those who survived it were given what was popularly called the Order of the Frozen Meat, because it was so ghastly. See, the German army was wholly underprepared for the campaign in Russia. It was expected to last a few months. So the fact that they had to survive through a whole winter was completely unexpected. The rail network was a shambles, so the supply broke down. And he describes in great detail, completely vividly, and it makes it easy, well, so far as you can understand such a thing without living through it. He makes it easy to start visualizing it insofar as you can. And by the end of that winter, he gets off relatively lightly because of his legs. In some way, they've just sort of given up on him.
Right.
So he's sent back, all the way back to Germany. In fact, after the first winter, he's very lucky for a couple of years. He keeps getting sent back. He keeps hitting doctors who are nice guys. They think the whole thing is so awful that they want to give these nice poor buggers out there who have to do the fighting a bit of a break. And instead of just sending them a bit to the rear where they can recover in some awful makeshift hospital on the Russian front, these doctors would give them like a chitty, which would entitle them to go all the way back to Germany and have home leave and all that kind of thing. And so he gets this about 3 times, and he's only really wounded once. He's sent back once because of his legs, and then a second time because he comes back and immediately starts having palpitations. But the doctor he encounters is so nice to him that he gives him the home leave chitty. And then the third time, well, I think he is actually wounded then, but he hits another doctor who does the same thing. So he's very lucky in his frontline doctors. However, his luck runs out in 1944. And as I said before, he's back early in the year on just regular home leave because the German army was surprisingly generous with home leave.
Right.
The vast majority being only a train ride away, really.
Yep.
So to keep morale up, they tended to give as many people as possible, as much leave as possible, whether convalescent or otherwise. And it was during this that he typed up the manuscript. And then a few months later, his luck ran out, and according to, it's not said anywhere in the text, but according to the facsimile of a Red Cross report, as far as the Red Cross could determine in 1970, he seems to have died somewhere in the neighborhood of Vitebsk in Belarus in late June of that year, which is... he and a great many others were killed at that time.
Right. So the manuscript was typed while he was on his last stint of home leave. Mm-hmm. Presumably it was left behind in Germany.
Oh, yes.
And discovered how?
Well, it was known in his family, but rather oddly perhaps, nobody tried to... Now, I'll go back on that. It probably wasn't odd that none of his family tried to publish it because it was so painful, especially if he was an only child.
Critical of the German campaign, or just...
Well, it's hard. He's certainly not fanatical about it. He was no Nazi of any description, but he accepts it in a way which is resigned and also excited. He points out at certain times that it is actually an adventure, and that he and his pals... They look down on those, however much they complain, however much they suffer for something that has no end in sight and that is not, sure as hell, not doing them any good. For all of that, they look down greatly on the ones back home who haven't been through this. They're proud of their suffering and the fact that they can endure and face death and deal out death and still keep going.
So the manuscript is in the hands of the family?
Well, it's in the hands of the family.
How long?
Well, several decades. It's only in very recent years, just several years ago, that I think it was an aunt of his who was in old age, and before she departed, she wanted the world to know about it, so she got in touch with a German journalist who then, quite quickly, within months, put it into publication.
And it was put into English, 2 or 3 years ago?
Yes, it's very recent.
Well, it sounds like a fascinating book.
It is, and it's quite short, and it's available in the library.
Norwich Library.
Yes.
Excellent. The book we've been talking about is A Stranger to Myself by Willi Peter Reese, an account of one German, his life, and ultimately his death on the Russian front between 1941 and 1944. Thank you very much, Peter.
Thank you, Mark.
Our thanks there to Mark Bond Webster and his guest for this week, Peter Barrow. Fascinating stuff.